Hi, my name's Phil. I'm a psychotherapeutic counsellor, a supervisor, and an EMDR stroke trauma therapist. I'd like to discuss the answer to a question I often get asked by clients in therapy. And that would be, if I'm not a bad person, why do I feel so much shame? Now, the answer to this question often has its roots in a process we know as called projective identification. Now, projective identification is a mechanism, a psychological mechanism that some people use to rid themselves of the feelings that they can't tolerate within themselves. It's quite hard to get our head around how this works because, in effect, what we're doing is actually picking up other people's feelings from the ether, from being in their contact. And with identification, we identify with those feelings and believe them to be ours. So, in effect, we start feeling how they are. And often, as a result of that, they start feeling better because they're not carrying that feeling around anymore. You are. So the way this tends to work is that people who use projective identification to get rid of feelings, they often don't have another way of dealing with that feeling. Like some people may be able to dissociate, some people be able to get that feeling out of their body with healthy sort of exercise, be able to reassure themselves that they don't need to feel that feeling. They'll have mechanisms. If they aren't able to dissociate or convert, say, shame into a feeling that is more tolerable, into another feeling, so instead of feeling shame, they may feel anger and they just get angry at everyone instead. If they can't do that and they're just stuck with their shame, they might project their shame out. Now, that doesn't mean to say that if you meet someone like this, you're just going to immediately identify with their shame, take it on board. It's more complex than that. Even though you will have probably felt around certain people you've met, you might have all of a sudden started feeling worse about yourself or guilty or you're sad or angry. That might be because you are picking up the projected feelings from that person. But as you move away from them, as you sort of create a bit of distance, you probably feel better and those feelings will fall away from your body. You won't have identified them as being a permanent fixture within you, as actually relating to you. But if that person acts in a way to get you to take on board that feeling, so like someone trying to get rid of their shame, that person might be walking around judging everybody. It's the only way that they can feel better about themselves is by finding faults with other people. But that isn't enough to make other people take on board their shame. So they might have to shame you in some way, and this can be done quite passively. It can be done very covertly. Often, people will be shaming you with a smile on their face as they're picking, saying, "Oh, you've got big feet in those shoes," and you might start to feel that shame. And if eventually you might start looking at your shoes, you might start having to hide your feet when you meet people because you've actually identified with the person's shame about their body dysmorphia has somehow been they've invited you to over a period of time take on board their shame. So this doesn't usually happen within instants. These people who use projective identification take their time. They cultivate the feeling of shame within you over very subtle, or it can be very obvious ways, depending on how vulnerable you are to take on board their shame. If you're very resistant to it, they might have to work harder to shame you, so they'll be more critical, they may be more devaluing. They'll find ways to do that. But if you aren't vulnerable to taking on board people's shame, you won't do it. You'll feel the press against your boundaries. You'll feel your self-esteem getting eroded by this sort of behavior, and you won't want to be around them. You'll probably want to distance yourself from people. But if, for say, you've been brought up in an environment where projective identification was used by parents to expel their feelings of their own inadequacies or their body dysmorphia onto you as a child, that you might have taken on board those feelings and sort of appeased your parents by doing that. That's you've believed via this series of manipulation, by the comments or statements they were making about you, that you are the one that's bad in this relationship. You are the shame. You are the trouble in this household. You might have believed that because you constantly told it. And who better to get, you know, to believe this sort of stuff than an immature child who believes what the world is telling them? A child believes that their parents are the font of all knowledge, that, if they're telling me I'm the problem in this house, it must be me. So we start to identify with them. And then, of course, if that parent then goes around telling everyone you're the problem, they believe you're the problem. You believe you're the problem. You've totally identified with that sort of low self-worth of theirs. So you stop being you, and you've become you actually now feel how they feel in the world. So they probably feel better now because you're not feeling, because you're not, that you're carrying their emotions and they're not. So of course, but that also means if you create distance from them, they probably will start to feel their own feelings again because they need that person to put. So they quite often they will keep close to the people that they project the stuff into. Eventually, people who identify with projective identification will not be able to tolerate it anymore, and they may leave relationships as adults. They may just leave, and then the person who's been projecting all of this stuff will typically fall apart at that point, because then they have to start owning all their own shame, their guilt, their fear, whatever it is they've been projecting into you. So typically, why we're feeling, bad when we haven't done anything wrong often has its roots in this sort of vulnerability to projective identification. So if you do start feeling that, you need to start challenging, is this feeling mine, or am I in the proximity of someone who actually feels like this, but are in denial of that? Because often the person will be wanting to make you feel that you're the problem. So but it's just, if you're vulnerable because that was how you were brought up, people have always projected their shame onto you. You are going to be vulnerable to around other people who are doing that. Like I said, it's not saying that people will be doing that if they're bad people consciously thinking of doing that. They're just trying to survive in the only way they know, because they probably had that done to them at some level when they were a child. So that was modeled. But not everybody who had that done to them does it to other people. Some people are the carriers of it. Some people project it out. And it's thinking of it in those ways, but it definitely needs challenging. And usually if you can start to challenge and rationalize, why would I need to feel this feeling? What am I really a bad person? If we can actually build more of a logical response to that, we may be able to challenge the shame. Well, I hope that was a an answer to that question that was okay for you to sort of get your head around, because it's a very complex sort of discussion, projective identification. But we will talk about it further in other videos. So if you liked it, please subscribe and hit the like button, and I shall do another one of these shortly. Thank you. Goodbye.